The mansion on the hill glowed like a crown under the night sky, its windows glittering with light, laughter, and lies. Inside, people in silk and gold swirled like a living painting, toasting to the billionaire's success. Richard Cavendish, the name that meant power, legacy, and money that never ran out. Yet in the shadows behind the chandeliers, a woman in a plain black maid's uniform carried a tray of champagne glasses, careful not to let her trembling hands show. Her name was Althea. She had worked in that house for 7 years, long enough to know how secrets crept into the corners of every room like dust, silent, ignored, until they choked you. She kept her head down as she served. No one ever looked at her face. They saw the uniform, the brown skin, the quiet efficiency, never the woman beneath. She was invisible, and that invisibility was what had kept her alive all these years. But tonight something felt wrong. The air was heavy, the laughter too sharp. She caught fragments of whispered conversations, documents, audit, embezzlement. Richard's voice, smooth and commanding, cut through it all. "Handle it. I'll take care of whoever talks." Althea didn't mean to overhear, but she'd been polishing the crystal near the study door when Richard's business partner stormed in, voice low but furious. "You're going to ruin everything. The government's on us, Rich. If those ledgers get out, we're finished." Richard's reply was a cold, amused whisper. "Then we'll make sure they don't." An hour later, the mansion was chaos. Sirens screamed outside. Police flooded the marble floors. Someone had leaked the financial reports. Someone from inside. And somehow, before she could even understand how, all fingers pointed to her. The black maid who'd been in the study that night. She was dragged out from the servant quarters in the early morning hours, her wrists cuffed in front of all the people who'd never learned her last name. "I didn't do anything," she cried. "Please, I didn't—" But her words drowned under the noise of cameras and accusations. Richard stood by the staircase, his jaw tight, his blue eyes unreadable. For a brief second she thought he might speak, that he'd say what he knew. He'd clear her name, tell them it wasn't her, that she couldn't even read the ledgers they were talking about. But he didn't. He only said coldly, "Let justice take its course." That was the last thing she heard before the cell door slammed shut behind her. 10 years. 10 years of iron bars and grey walls, of being called thief, liar, and criminal. 10 years for a crime she didn't commit. At first, she screamed every night. Then she stopped screaming. The world forgot her. Even her own heart tried to. She learned to keep her head down to survive. Every month she wrote a letter to the Cavendish estate, to Richard, begging him to tell the truth. None were ever answered, but the truth had a way of haunting people, even ones who thought they'd buried it under money and power. 10 years later, on a cold October morning, the world outside had changed, but Althea's eyes hadn't. She stood by the prison gate, clutching the small brown bag that held everything she owned. A pair of worn shoes, a faded photo of her son, a folded piece of paper with an address she'd memorized 1,000 times. Cavendish Industries, 1701 East Avenue. She walked away from the gates, her shadow long against the pavement. She had no plan, no money, and nowhere to go. But she had a promise. She would make Richard Cavendish remember the woman he destroyed. Miles away, Richard sat in his penthouse office, staring out over the city skyline. He had everything and power, wealth, the respect of men who bowed when he entered the room. But the older he grew, the more that night clawed at him. He'd never told anyone what really happened. He'd let her take the fall because he'd been afraid to lose everything. But recently, strange things had started happening. Anonymous letters, unmarked envelopes, photographs of that night 10 years ago, the study, the ledgers, the broken lock on the safe, and then one line written in black ink across a sheet of white paper. "I know the truth, Richard." There he froze when he read it. The letter smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the same scent his maids used back then. The same scent she used. He hadn't heard her name in years, but it rang in his mind like a curse. Althea, the woman who'd lost everything for his sins, for a man who'd built his empire on control. It was the first time in a decade that he felt truly afraid. As Althea walked through the city that no longer recognized her, she thought of her son, the one she hadn't seen since the day she was taken away. He'd been 10 years old, hiding behind a police car, crying her name. Now he would be 20. Did he hate her? Did he even remember her face? Her heart clenched, but she kept walking. She had one thing left, truth, and she was going to use it. If you're watching this right now, tell me, where are you watching from? Every story has a place where it begins, and I'd love to know yours. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories like this one, because this is only the beginning. The sky over the city looked bruised, smeared in shades of violet and grey, as if it carried all the stories people tried to bury beneath its skyline. Althea pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders and stood across the street from the glass tower that bore the name Cavendish Industries. 10 years ago, she used to clean those marble floors, polish the elevator buttons until they gleamed like coins, and take pride in doing it right. Now she stared at that same building like it was the mouth of a beast that had already swallowed her once. She had nothing but the address, an old bus card, and a fire in her chest that prison hadn't managed to kill. For 10 years she had dreamed of this moment. Not revenge exactly, but reckoning. A day when someone, anyone, would look her in the eye and see what they had done. She crossed the street slowly, head down, blending into the rush-hour crowd. The security guards at the front doors didn't notice her at first. To them, she was just another woman in a worn coat, tired and forgettable. But when she stepped into the lobby, her reflection caught in the marble floor and she froze. For a moment she saw the younger version of herself, the maid with her hair neatly tied, the one who smiled politely while serving champagne to people who never remembered her name. "Ma'am, can I help you?" one of the guards asked, his tone brisk. Althea straightened. "I'm here to see Mr. Cavendish." The guard frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She held his gaze, her voice steady. "But tell him Althea's here. He'll remember." The guard blinked, confused, but something in her tone must have made him pause. He picked up the phone, muttered into it, and then looked back at her. "Someone's coming down. Wait here." A few minutes later, a woman in a sharp navy suit and red lipstick stepped out of the elevator. "Mr. Cavendish doesn't take walk-ins," she said curtly. "Whatever your business is, you can leave it with me." Althea's eyes didn't move from the woman's face. "Tell him the maid he sent to prison is standing in his lobby." The woman's confident expression faltered. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Althea said quietly. "Tell him Althea Carter is here." The assistant hesitated only a moment before disappearing back into the elevator. Althea waited, heartbeat loud in her ears. The seconds dragged into minutes. People came and went, the world continuing as if she weren't even there. But then, finally, the elevator doors opened again, and there he was, Richard Cavendish. 10 years older, a few more lines around his mouth, but the same steel-grey eyes, the same presence that made rooms fall silent when he entered. He was wearing a dark suit, expensive and immaculate. When he saw her, he stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. "Althea," he said finally, his voice low. "Mr. Cavendish," she replied, her tone calm, almost polite. He glanced around at the curious faces in the lobby. "Let's talk somewhere private." They rode the elevator in silence. The hum of the machine filled the space between them, heavy with things unsaid. When they reached his office, he gestured for her to sit. She didn't. She wanted to stand, to face him like an equal for once. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said quietly. "I didn't expect to lose 10 years of my life for your crime," she replied. He flinched almost imperceptibly. "For you don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying." She stepped closer. "I was in that cell for a decade. I lost my son, my name, everything. You let me take the fall because you were afraid of losing your empire." His jaw tightened. "You can't prove that." Her eyes burned. "Can't I?" She reached into her coat and pulled out a small flash drive. "This contains every file your partner hid before he disappeared. Records, bank transfers, emails, all tied to you." He stared at it, color draining from his face. "How did you get this?" "A friend," she said simply. "Someone who knew the truth and finally decided to help me." "You're making a mistake," he said sharply, rising from his chair. "Do you think anyone will believe a convict over me?" She laughed then, a small bitter sound that made him falter. "That's what you said 10 years ago, but people listen now. I made sure of it. There's a journalist waiting for this file. If anything happens to me, it goes public." His eyes darkened. "You're threatening me." "I'm promising you." The room was silent except for the hum of the city below. Then, slowly, Richard sank back into his chair, his facade cracking. You don't understand, Althea. If this comes out, everything I've built will fall apart. She looked at him, her voice steady. Then maybe it should. He stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. For the first time in his life, Richard Cavendish didn't have words. He had power, money, influence, but not the one thing she had now, the truth. You could have stopped this years ago, she whispered. You could have told them I was innocent. His shoulders sagged. I was weak. I thought I could fix it quietly, that you'd get out sooner. But once it started, I couldn't stop it. I told myself it was too late. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You don't get to feel sorry now. He looked up at her then, really looked. For the first time, he didn't see a maid. He saw a woman who'd survived the ruin he caused. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Nothing, she said. Not money. Not apology. Just your truth, he swallowed hard. And if I give it? She turned toward the window, the city lights glimmering like distant stars. Then maybe I can live again. Silence stretched between them. Then quietly he said, Come back tomorrow. I'll have something for you. When she left his office, the air outside felt sharper, alive. She didn't know if she believed him, but she knew he was scared. And that was a start. That night, as she walked through the streets, Althea stopped by an old shelter. She stood by the doorway, watching a group of volunteers handing out blankets. A tall young man with kind eyes helped a child with his coat. Something about him made her chest tighten. When he turned, the world stopped. It was him. Her son, older now, stronger. But it was him. For a moment she couldn't move. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face as she whispered his name. He froze, eyes widening as recognition dawned. Then he ran to her, arms wrapping around her in a trembling embrace that made the world disappear. Mom, he choked out. She held him tightly, her heart breaking and mending all at once. I'm here, baby. I'm here. For the first time in 10 years, Althea felt alive. But miles away in the glass tower she had left behind, Richard Cavendish sat at his desk staring at the flash drive. He opened a hidden drawer and pulled out a revolver, placing it beside a folder labeled Confidential. If he told the truth, he'd lose everything. But if he didn't, he might lose his soul. And as the city lights flickered, Richard realized the past he buried wasn't gone, it was coming for him. The next morning broke under a haze of grey clouds, the kind that made the city feel suspended in time. Althea barely slept. The reunion with her son had left her trembling between joy and disbelief. She'd spent 10 years imagining that moment, yet living it was something else entirely. His name was Malcolm now, no longer the small boy she'd kissed goodbye before her arrest. He was 20, working with a local shelter, studying part-time. He'd thought she was dead. The world had told him his mother was gone. When he asked her what really happened, she couldn't bring herself to tell him everything. Not yet, she just said, someone lied. And now I'm going to make sure they can't anymore. By noon, she was standing once more in the marble lobby of Cavendish Industries. This time, she didn't wait for permission. She walked straight toward the elevators like she belonged there. People turned to look, but no one stopped her. It was as if the universe had decided she had waited long enough. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she found Richard Cavendish already waiting, pale, tired, and strangely calm. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat beside him. The folder from yesterday was open on the desk, papers spread across like a confession laid bare. I wasn't sure you'd come back, he said softly. I don't run anymore, she replied. Do you have what I asked for? He nodded slowly, sliding a document across the table. It's my full statement and signed, dated. I already sent copies to my lawyer and the district attorney. I told them everything, how the accounts were manipulated, how I let you take the blame. Her breath caught. You confessed? I did, he gave a bitter smile. It's strange. The moment I signed it, I felt lighter than I have in years. Like I could finally breathe. She studied him carefully. And what happens now? He exhaled, looking past her at the skyline. The board will remove me by morning. The prosecutors will come after me next. But at least it's the truth. Althea felt her knees weaken. She had dreamed of justice for so long, but she'd never imagined it would come from him willingly. Why? She asked finally. After all this time, why tell the truth now? He looked at her, eyes hollow but honest. Because you reminded me who I used to be, before money and fear made me something else. You risked your life for me once, Althea. I didn't deserve it then. Maybe this is my way of giving it back." She was silent for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "It doesn't bring back what I lost." "I know," he said, "but maybe it stops you from losing anymore." He picked up a small envelope from the desk and slid it toward her. "This is for you. Your record's being reopened. You'll be cleared within days. The DA already has the paperwork." Her hands shook as she took it. Inside was a letter, official, sealed, signed by the state. She wasn't just free. She was finally innocent. Tears filled her eyes. 10 years, she whispered. 10 years for something I didn't do. He nodded slowly. And 10 years of my life running from what I did. We're both paying for it. A long silence stretched between them, the kind that only truth can create. Then Althea turned to leave. "Althea," he said suddenly. She stopped. "For what it's worth." "I'm sorry." She looked back at him, her voice low and steady. "I forgave you years ago, Richard, but that doesn't mean I'll forget." And then she was gone, down the elevator, past the lobby, out into the cold air that felt cleaner than it ever had. That evening, the news broke across every major network. Billionaire Richard Cavendish confesses to decade-old corporate crime. Exonerated Maid found innocent. The world buzzed with shock. Investors panicked. Commentators debated. And somewhere in a quiet shelter downtown, Althea watched the broadcast beside her son. When the anchor mentioned her name, Malcolm turned to her, eyes wide. "Mom, they're saying you're free." She smiled faintly, tears tracing her cheeks. "I was always free. They just didn't know it." He hugged her tightly, and for the first time she didn't feel the weight of those lost years pressing on her chest. She felt light, fragile but whole. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. The storm that had chased her for a decade was finally breaking. Then, just as she thought it was over, her phone buzzed. "Unknown number." She frowned and answered. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice she recognized, trembling, desperate. "Althea." "It's Richard." Her stomach dropped. "What is it?" "They're not going to let me live through this," he said, his voice cracking. "The partners, they know I talked. They'll ruin me. Maybe worse." "Richard, listen to me," she said quickly. "Go to the police. Let them protect you," he laughed bitterly. "You still care even after what I did. That's what makes you better than me." "Richard, don't." The line went dead. A cold dread crept through her veins. She grabbed her coat and rushed outside, the rain starting to fall in heavy sheets. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. By the time she reached the tower, flashing red lights painted the walls. Police cars, ambulances, crowds. An officer stopped her at the entrance. "Ma'am, you can't go in." "What happened?" she demanded. The officer hesitated. "The CEO, Richard Cavendish, he jumped." The world blurred. The rain mixed with her tears as she sank onto the wet pavement, staring up at the building where her life had been stolen, and, somehow returned. He was gone. Justice had been served, but not in the way she had imagined. There were no handcuffs, no trials, just a man who finally told the truth and couldn't live with it. Later that night, Althea stood by the river where the city lights shimmered on the dark water. Malcolm stood beside her, silent. "Do you think he found peace?" Malcolm asked quietly. She watched the water flow, endless and dark. "Maybe," she said softly. "But peace isn't something you find, son. It's something you build, every day, no matter how broken you are." He nodded, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "Then let's build ours." She looked up at the night sky, the same sky that had watched her through iron bars and sleepless nights. For the first time, it didn't feel cruel. It felt open, free. As the rain finally stopped, she whispered to herself, "It's over." But somewhere deep down, she knew the story would never really end. Because truth, once uncovered, keeps echoing, through lives, through hearts, through time. And in that echo, Althea found her redemption.